The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Planted with Sara Payan podcast. I'm Sara Payan, your host, and today we are ending a beautiful month of craft cannabis farmers. We started out with Humboldt Seed Company, and then we went on to many of our craft farmers. And every October, we like to end with the HCGA. So I'm really excited to have you here. Today, I am joined by Hannah White, Nat Pennington, Ross Gordon, Sean Cherry, Steve Liu, and Indy Riggs. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. When people think of craft cannabis, one place always comes to mind, Humboldt County. It's a region that shaped not only the cannabis industry, but how we think about stewardship, community, and the legacy of the plant itself. Question to start out with, Humboldt has become synonymous with craft cannabis. For each of you, what does craft really mean, not just as a marketing term, but as a way of life and work?
Could I start?
Sean, yeah, I do.
I would love to. I think it means craft cannabis is a growing cannabis, but also in relation to, how it integrates with your community and the land. I'm a family farmer, obviously. I grow multi-generationally with my mother here. And I'm also, a part of the culture here that allows me to be like, the craft cannabis that allows me to take part of the other extracurriculars in my life, like the volunteer fire department, or even growing other agricultural products. Like I have a ton of peppers right now, so I get to polyculture that. I think that's a big thing, and that also how that relates with land stewardship and how we can how our flowers are a direct product of how we take care of the land and how we relate with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and I forgot to mention joining us is Nat Pennington as well of Humboldt Seed Company. We did an earlier episode, and it's really nice to have you back, Nat. Sorry about that. I got so excited seeing everybody here at once, and normally I get that all right. But who else would like? I'd love to hear from all of you around this. What does craft cannabis mean to you?
Indy raised his hand. Go do it.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Hannah. Similar to Sean, when I think of craft cannabis and craft cannabis farmers, I think of a lot of what he just said, and I think of farmers like Sean Cherry and his mom Tori. I think of Hannah and her husband Riley. I think of environmental stewards when I think of craft cannabis producers. I know that all the ones I know are stewards of their land. I think of conscious cannabis that's produced consciously, and with really high standards. So, and yeah, I think of Humboldt County too. I do believe that this is, the epicenter. I'm a little biased of craft cannabis, but we've been doing it a long time here like that, and it's still going strong. So, I will pass it now to you, Hannah.
All right. Thanks, Indy. And yeah, I mean, craft cannabis is something that it's like, how do we define craft? What does that mean? And I think it means something a little bit different to each of us who are producing and relating with this plant. And a lot of it is that relationship with the land. And it's like we can bring in like an environmental perspective and a greater agrarian perspective, but I think the craft is really like, are you paying attention to this plant in its relationship with you, with its surroundings, with its soil, like really paying attention, and also having an intention of where it's going to go. Like, where is this plant going to? Like, we're growing these flowers for consumption. Who gets to enjoy it? So really having the consumer in mind and like their enjoyable experience, their medicating experience, their whatever it is that they're looking for, really like bringing that into the cultivation and, like bringing that energy of the consumer into the cultivation and, really thinking about that end goal in mind.
Yeah. And I don't know, I think everything that everyone said is spot on, and I think one thing I'd add to the diversity of, you know, the different varieties that we all do and love, and knowledge, in-depth knowledge, and sort of just the, I don't know if anywhere can match Humboldt's experience level for you know, cultivating and making some of the best cannabis in the world. So it's hard to do that when you're just sort of a cannabis factory, and there's really no cannabis factories around here. They're cannabis farms and gardens, and people put their heart and soul into it. So yeah, that's Humboldt.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. I mean, it's especially when you look at, and it's not to say that I don't know very talented craft growers that grow indoors, but there's something about the sun and the environment and what that brings in the expression of the plant that is such a game changer that I don't think a lot of people truly understand. Steve, what are your thoughts?
I think that point you're getting onto, Sarah, is something that I take to heart. Um, locally, I also support and work with a local wine shop and a vintner that markets his wines, and they're all made in Humboldt. And he'll go to a vineyard and pick the most tortured kind of plant, and not there's some very adverse conditions our farmers are dealing with, with respect to rain and mold and the stress of being an outdoor farmer where you can't have the most consistent controlled conditions. And I think a lot of that stress and the pressures of different pests and things like that, it's part of being alive. We become weak and get allergies and things like that when we're not exposed to things in our youth. And I think that the stresses that outdoor plants go through just really lend to their expression and what you get. And there's also an element of, I mean, every year is unique. Every plant is unique. Every year is unique, and having all that, those varied impacts to the plants affect their expression, and you just get a truly unique product that's not the same as it's not the same consistency, but it's unique. And so I like what Hannah was saying as far as where the plant ends up going, and these certain manufacturers, especially in the hash realm, are able to just capture the essence of the plant. And I think I find that fascinating, and I think that lends a lot to what our farmers are growing, and as well as our manufacturers in our area as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I always found it exciting to see the same cultivar from a different farmer come in, and from harvest to harvest see the variations, and a lot of times they would be very different. And there's something really exciting about that, especially if there was like a certain aroma or an effect that would really catch my eye, and I'd be like, wow, this year it's feeling like blah blah blah. It's like there's just something, it is very much like with grapes. Like when you think about what are good years for certain varietals of grapes, and what those effects are, and the aromas and the flavors. And I'm also a big fan of like storing things properly so that I can keep them a little bit longer and enjoy them a little bit longer. I'll admit it, I'm a little bit of a weed hoarder. I don't know if that's a problem or not, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Ross, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really agree with everything that's been said so far. And I think one thing that immediately comes to mind for me when I think about craft is contrasting it with what it's not, which is a commodity. And, a commodity is something that is fungible, that's interchangeable, that really the goal is just to produce as much as possible at the lowest cost. And I think one place where historically there's been some of the greatest distance between policymakers and farmers is this assumption that cannabis is a commodity, and it's really not. I think, Steve, you mentioned wines, or you mentioned grapes, other specialty products, things like coffee, like beer, like cheese. We know that the diversity of those products and the amount of human connection and artisanal skill that goes into crafting those products is really what makes them special, and what makes them, something that people want and feel connected to. And so I think that diversity is really at the center of what makes cannabis special. And definitely, I think Humboldt is at the center of that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, we hear a lot of people in the industry talking about it as a consumer packaged good. And I know, like, even back in the day when we were measuring out deli style in the dispensary and somebody's favorite flower would be out, they would get really upset. You'd have to explain to them it isn't coming from a factory. We're not just easily replicating these flowers. They take time to grow. And as we've been getting into packaged cannabis in the era of legalization, it's something that you even more so have to educate about, because they've lost touch with the plant. You're not pulling out a big bud and measuring things out. It's all there. It's a lot of times, if you're getting it from a mass grower, the trim's not so great. It's like little nuggets of hard stuff, and people are like, no, this is a product. Look, it's in a jar. And it's like, there's more to it than that. Like, there's a constant struggle or constant work towards reminding public of the nuance of cannabis and, what it is, rather than, in this society where we're constantly instant gratification, mix and serve, just go to the store and get something. I think it's an excellent opportunity to get to people to be slowing down a little bit and being mindful, not only in their use, but of their perception of it in itself. The HCGA has been such a powerful advocate for small farms and legacy cultivators. How would you describe its mission today in this evolving landscape? And Hannah, as chair, I'm especially interested to see what you have to say about that. Give the gift that everyone will remember this holiday season, the 12 J's of Christmas gift box. This limited edition collection features 12 premium pre-rolls from 12 sun-grown farms in Humboldt, Mendocino, and Trinity counties. It's the ultimate gift for craft cannabis lovers and a way to support small farmers in the Emerald Triangle. Hurry, quantities are limited. Reserve yours now at emeraldtrianglecraft.com.
The last time that we met, we were at a previous board member's house, Dylan, over at Mattole Valley Sungrown, and the last time I was at his house, not recording this podcast, but we were having kind of a big deep dive as a board. He's no longer on our board. He had served his term, and so we got to send him back to the field. But looking at our mission statement of preserving, protecting, and enhancing the world-renowned craft cannabis that is produced out of Humboldt and its farmers is no less relevant today than it was when this organization was founded. It is, I think, even more relevant now for us to continue how to figure out how we can enhance public awareness and also bring Humboldt and our name to the national stage, bring it to the international stage, getting our in the era of consumer packaged goods. There's new cult consumers who have don't know how to roll a joint, don't break up flour with their hands or have a grinder, just smoking a pen. And we can see that some of these craft cannabis products are making it into these pens, right? We have Golden Bear State Award winners coming out of Humboldt County with edible gummies from, craft cannabis grown from their farm of genetics that have been developed for, some decades. I'm talking about Huckleberry Hill cannabis, but getting Humboldt, getting our name, our craft cannabis, our flowers into, if we can't get them into the hands of national and international consumers yet, keeping our name in people's mouth, keeping our relevance and having folks, understand like the history and the culture, I think is something that's so important right now. And, also just sinking into our roots. Right now, our board is all volunteer run, our organization. We have independent contractors, but we're not actively operating with staff right now. We are, like really hunkering in and doing this deep dive of, farmer owned, farmer grown, farmer advocated for. And it's a really, an empowering place to be as a farmer, advocating for each other, showing up for each other, and still showing up for this plant. Um, I think I think that's where the heartbeat is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Ross, what are your thoughts?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was saying HCGA has been such a powerful advocate for small farms and legacy cultivators. What do you describe as its mission today in the evolving landscape?
Well, yeah, I think that's a great question. And I definitely think that the situation has really evolved over the years, for as long as I've been involved in policy. And I started in policy with what was then the California Growers Association, which HCGA was partnered with back in the beginning of 2018. So it was the very beginning of the legal cannabis framework. And I think at that point there was, a lot of trepidation and a lot of anxiety about what legal cannabis would mean for small farmers. But there was also, in other ways, I think a lot of optimism and a lot of hope that being able to go legal and to be, above board and not have to worry about being criminalized, being enforced on would, kind of usher in a better situation. Since then, I think there are, of course, a lot of benefits to being part of a legal framework. But at the same time, it's become very challenging over the past decade. And that's true throughout the industry. That's not just true for small farmers. But I think what has been especially difficult for farmers is we've just seen this total collapse in wholesale cannabis prices from maybe $1,200, $1,300 a pound down to as low as maybe $250 a pound now. Maybe more if you're growing high quality, have good connections, but it really, has gotten to that level for a lot of people, and that's below the cost of production. So what do you do in a situation? How do you look at policy in a context where a lot of cannabis is being sold below the cost of production by small farmers who are trying to compete with these huge mega farms growing dozens of acres? And really, I think it comes back to the conversation we were just having, which is craft. Because ultimately we're not and never have been, even in those early days, imagining ourselves as producing, a $250 a pound product, which is going to keep up in volume with these huge mega farms. Really, the question is, as Hannah put it, is getting the Humboldt name out there and being able to show, this craft differentiated product that is something unique, that is something special, that people should be willing to pay a little bit more for, just as people are willing to pay a little bit more for high quality coffee, beer, wine, whatever. And so looking at ways to brand cooperatively, looking at opportunities like appellations, looking at opportunities like direct to consumer sales, which have been so important in the wine industry, and keeping small and craft producers relevant and making sure that consumers have access to those specialty products. I think we're at a place in the process where it's more important than ever to be really focused on those types of opportunities, because we have hit the point where I think consumers are demanding a craft high quality product, and definitely farmers, are really feeling the need to have access to those markets in the same way that specialty producers of any other crop, any other specialty good like beer or wine would have access to.
Yeah. And one thing I think is really interesting is, when we've gotten into legalization, you'll hear people saying, oh, well, growing cannabis is hard on the environment. It takes up a lot of resources, but what they don't understand is that that's like when you're in desert hot springs, indoors, growing weed, that is going to take up a lot. But if you look at, farms that are growing outdoors and are really aware of the way that they're growing, it actually, the UN did a report that as of now, we have 50 more harvests because of the way mass production kills the topsoil. But we have small farmers in cannabis that are using restorative methods to actually help build up the topsoil, that are using the way that they're planting and working with insects, so that you don't have to use harmful chemicals and other things, and that these are actually models that could be used outside of cannabis to restore the earth and to teach farmers about some of the harmful practices they're having that are harming the earth. I mean, I know Monsanto is very interested in cannabis, but they've kind of backed away because they've just realized that at this point in time, it's just not worth their while. Although I do believe they still have their sticky fingers in there. But, I just see a lot of our practices as ways that it's not just about cannabis. It's about creating a model for other people to replicate, to preserve what we have left of our environment and beyond.
I love that vision because I think of all crops, I think you can sort of taste and feel the difference when you have partaken in regeneratively grown cannabis and its complexity compared to, say, like a salt grown indoor product. Um, that's a lot of what got me interested in cannabis was how it was being farmed and how it was being mass farmed. And it pulled me into doing all sorts of research and implementation of regenerative practices. I mean, just in producing my own fertilizer using organic methods where I basically fill a container with rainwater and green waste and let it decompose. It gets colonized by the larvae of a pollinator, and so I end up creating fertilizer and a pollinator in a single practice, and it's just so in tune, I feel, with nature and this like ancient farming practice that ends up doing everything you need, both providing nutrition for your plants as well as helping them get pollinated.
Yeah. See, those sorts of connections are the things that I love talking about. Although on the point of salty cannabis, I was in Missouri and I met up with this amazing researcher who I'm going to have on the show later on this year. And he was talking about they're doing research about the trichomes on the stems of the plant. So not the bulbous trichomes. And what they were finding was that when the plants were getting too much salt, these trichomes are actually drawing it out of the plant, and they're expressing it out of the plant. And I was really fascinated by that because, as cannabis being a bioaccumulator, I was asking him, I said, have you done any studies on, where they're in toxic environments behaving as a bioaccumulator and what's happening with those toxins? Are they being pushed out by those trichomes as well? And he said, no, we haven't looked for that yet, but we should. And I was, that would be really interesting to see, like, is there some sort of change too? Like, how does the plant convert it so that it's no longer harmful? I mean, there are lots of different things with some of the practices that may not be ideal that we can learn about the plant from like a research perspective. And then that further, it furthers the conversation on why you should be doing things in a certain way. It's like showing the efficiency of the plant is one thing, but also really talking about how more environmentally conscious we should be with our farming practices. I just think that it's such a rich conversation, and going back to what I was saying before, it's just cannabis is such a macro micro thing because we can be talking about cannabis, but it's also a reflection of other practices and beliefs in the world around us, I think, too. So as
I want to echo Stephen. Yeah, and like I got to last 2 years practice, but also due to the margins in the economy and the market, I basically just made my own compost the last 2 years. That's all I fed my plants. And it's not only has it brought me closer to the growing of the plant and the ecology and the actual the organic and regenerative life, of the soil, but I can tell the difference smoking it. It's like, it's smooth. It's really nice. And everybody that smokes it can, is like, wow, this is different. And I'm like, yeah, I don't feed my plants really, except for the compost I make. So I think there's a uniqueness that we're trying to also uphold in that craft, that marketing we're trying to educate people within our organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And going a little bit deeper into the human side of cannabis, the people, the land, and the values that make farming what it is. Let's talk about that a little bit more too. So, Hannah, your farm has become a model of regenerative cultivation. What inspired your approach, and how does it reflect the larger culture of Humboldt farming?
Well, so when we had the opportunity to purchase our farm, it was with the intent to grow legal cannabis. We had been growing under 215 on like the old logging flats and the hideaways and the hills, the places that were far away from people, that were the socio-politically right places to hide and grow this crop, but they weren't actually great places to cultivate. We had to bring in soil, bring in containers, like to build up a farm, right? And so when we were offered this homestead, and it's an old piece of property that's on Humboldt County's like oldest maps, and is historically the Sanungwe and Hoopa people's land, and it's just this gorgeous flat piece in a mountain valley that's so protected. We're surrounded by national forests, and just like this, to find flat land that's agrable in Humboldt still on a little hideaway is just like so unique. And so having the opportunity to farm like we would farm tomatoes or cucumbers or any mixed vegetable flower crops that we're used to growing in our gardens, being able to till it up. I had this like epiphanal moment when I had my friend Bill there with his Kubota. It was like the sunset sherbet sunset and the dragonflies and the smell of the humic acid coming out of the turned soil was like an ecstasy moment for me. And I was like, we can't bring in commercial soil to this land. Like we have to, I was called, like we have to grow in this native soil. Like we've never had the opportunity. We've never had such rich land to be able to cultivate cannabis on. And it was 100% a learning curve. But the, greatest benefit that I see now, having cultivated this land for the last 8 years, is the flowers, and now specifically the hash products, that the flowers that we grow for solventless hash making grows best. We grow the best product out of that native soil, out of the land that is tended with the most care, that takes the most exercise and practice and maintenance of relationship, creates the highest quality products. I've been able to grow some of the same cultivars year after year, grow them in different areas of the farm. We have some greenhouses to help meet market conditions that, like provide our high quality flowers through more times of the year. And we can really see from the quality of the products, like the more regenerative, the soil that gets cover crop more, the soil that gets that has its more native constituents, creates better products. And like we see that from our hash makers, the manufacturers are like, oh my gosh, this banana punch, like, are you kidding me? This is so incredible. And they're like, this is sun grown. I'm like, this is sun grown, native soil, regenerative, like this is grown by plants, by people in love with these plants, in love with where we're also happy to just be people with plants outside, right? It's hard work, but it is so gratifying, like not only to have the relationship with the land, but to still have that relationship with each other.
Humboldt Seed Company from California's legendary Emerald Triangle is the state's largest licensed cannabis seed provider. Blending traditional breeding with modern innovation, they've created fan favorites like Jelly Donuts, Chicken and Waffles, California Haze, and the cult classic Blueberry Muffin. Visit HumboldtSeedCompany.com for top quality seeds and educational content. And keep an eye out for their upcoming Uruguay documentary. With pheno hunts at leading farms worldwide, Humboldt Seed Company brings unique aromas and flavors straight to you. Yeah. Why? And it's so beautiful because, a lot of people misunderstand what sun-grown cannabis is because we've all had that friend who grew something in the sun and gave you like a larvae bag of something. And you're like, this is it? But I remember talking to Johnny Casale and he was like, Sarah, back in the 215 days when you were selling some of your like high-end indoor cannabis, that was actually really good sun-grown. Like that, we said it was, indoor for the prices, but that was done outdoors. And it was really like being able to turn people on to, the fact that there's nothing like the sun is huge. Like what comes out of that. And Nat, you've spent years developing genetics that have become staples across California and beyond. How do you keep innovation alive while staying rooted in the craft ethos?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, the whole breeding aspect of cannabis is rooted in Humboldt 100%. Like, I know all of us probably never want to go back to the times where it was like you only could grow OG Kush and be able to have people, because it was just, all your eggs were in this one basket. And um it was sort of just this like misnomer that was the best thing in the world. I mean, some people, it's still certainly a fan favorite, and no shade on OG Kush or anything, but people say, well, what's your favorite kind of cannabis? And I'm always like, having the most choices is my favorite kind, because it's varies every single day, in the morning, from the afternoon to the evening. And so, there is no one cannabis for all time. And I think breeding and innovation has been a core of Humboldt and the Emerald Triangle for 40, 50 years, 60 years. And a lot of these people, part of HCGA, part of this greater community, have made their own cannabis and innovated their own types of cannabis and have that special market advantage because of that innovation. And I could go deep into like, really highly technical. I mean, you mentioned Monsanto, and I think like one of the most greatest things about being in the cannabis space, as many struggles as there are, and probably will continue to be, this space doesn't really work well. It kind of rejects that mentality of, like Monsanto is great, or Bayer, I should say, is great. And all of the big, super big agricultural breeding companies that are out there, they're really good at like breeding for numbers and kind of really objective questions. Like, does this varietal of soybean have the protein content for the cows to get big, or the oil content to make vegetable oil, or those kinds of questions are a lot easier things to answer with genomics and let's just simplify it, like GMO type editing of genes. And we have some questions that are like, is THC easy to manipulate? I'll admit that, like, I've been in rooms with geneticists, and I've got a background in genomics as well. And like, those are questions that we've set out to try to unravel. But cannabis is complex, and there's more to it. Like, the loci that control THC production are many and varied across the genome. So it just like doesn't really, it's not, the plant is a little bit more evolved in the plant kingdom. It's actually like a more evolved plant. And so it doesn't fit well into that paradigm of let's just manipulate it. And I think the biggest aspect of that is that the consumer base wants different things all the time, because why wouldn't you? And if you can have that, that's the best. It didn't take me long to come to that conclusion of being out here in the world of cannabis aplenty, that there were all these different great kinds and I wanted them all. And so I think that there's no question that that's going to continue to be the consumers are going to want more and more diversity and more selection to choose from. And that doesn't really fit well with the whole let's engineer one kind of cannabis to rule them all mentality of those mega breeding companies. And so I think it's like a balance of all of the using those tools, and not ignoring them because they're amazing tools, but also not expecting them to just like provide you with this holy grail of a weed genetic. And like, what keeps these people and the farmers in a better position, I think, as well, is that like, that sort of corporate, and I know this is cliche, but like the Budweiser cannabis, it has its place, but I don't think what anybody wants to produce in Humboldt. I don't think it's possible to produce that in these places. We're going to make something that's better and more unique, and people are going to savor it more than they might. When weed got more and more legal, sure, people were just like, give me the cheapest, strongest cannabis I can get my hands on. And that's a like understandable reaction to having like weed at your fingertips. You're like, oh my God, I want to get so stoned now. It's been illegal for so long. I'm going to get, and I think now people are less likely to go into the store and ask for like the cannabis equivalent of Everclear. Now that cannabis is legal, they're like, all right, I want something that's got some flavor and doesn't make me feel horrible the next day and isn't full of tons of gnarly chemicals. So they're not hopefully going to likely to shop for that, the crap that's out there. And yeah, I assume that that's something that happened with like other types of end of prohibition moments where like, you're kind of just not confused about what you want at first. You just want to enjoy this moment of legality. And now that you understand that, you're like a little bit more of a connoisseur. And I know like when I got to this area, I was like, so happy just to have whatever. And then it took me a while until I was like, I think I actually enjoy smoking this. And I'm not going to just, judge it by how frosty or any base things. And innovation in breeding is, all of those things. That's why it's so complicated. And that's why I think each grower can also kind of have their own palette and eventually be an artist of their own.
Well, it's so nuanced. I mean, as people have more experiences, they dial into what they want to feel, right? I mean, that's why we're starting to see more people getting into emerging cannabinoids and ratios. I mean, one of the Golden Bear winners was low THC, high THCV this past year. Actually, for the past 2 years, they've won Golden Bears for that. And that really illustrates, what we're seeing. I actually, I know you just finished a big pheno hunt, which I was totally bummed to miss, but we were heading to Iceland because I was speaking at a hemp conference there. And what I was learning when I was there, because they're really trying to get medicinal going, but they actually, not too long ago, ended their alcohol prohibition because they had 1989 is when beer was finally legal again in Iceland. And they had gotten rid of all alcohol except for Spain was like, well, if you don't take our red wine, we're not buying your bacalao. So they're like, oh, you're not going to buy our fish? Okay, so we'll let the wine come in. And then there were some other things with trade with spirits. So they started to allow those in. And for some reason, and it shows how policy makes absolutely no sense. And so much of it is about the inside dealings because they held on to beer for so long, where you've seen other countries where they didn't have access to good water, that beer was like their drink of choice. And all of a sudden they let it go. But at first they're like, oh, adults and children will be drunk in the streets if we allow beer. And then they found when they loosened everything up, consumption went way down, because when they were having this prohibition, people were kind of going for the Everclear. It's like, what's the most bang for your buck? Oh, and I can only drink beer in the duty-free store, and then I can't take it out. Well, how much can I chug before I leave? I mean, the way we look at things is so crazy, and just that whole like human nature aspect that really should be informing policy more so than these strategic relationships or, satisfying the prohibitionists. It's like, I mean, even now in, state committee meetings, I'm still hearing about what about the children? I'm like, well, they're not getting their weed from us. Let me tell you that. Like, let me dial in to you for the avenues that this is happening. And nobody wants to hear it because they're just so, that echo chamber of it's bad. We need to stop it. I don't want it. I feel like as we get into a more advanced, mature market, and we do start embracing the nuance, we'll be hearing less of that. And when people speak up, it's going to be like, well, no, that's just ridiculous.
I really agree with that, Sarah. And, data should be informing public policy, not personal belief systems. And, with what Nat was just saying too, I think that all ties back into like the whole wine conversation we were having earlier, and things like terroir and appellations and that nuance that does exist in cannabis yet is not recognized yet. Um, and so when thinking about normalization too, and HCGA's purpose and, how we can push that needle forward of normalization, like I look at wine as an example, as Ross was talking about earlier. And I look at times like, the end of prohibition and what was done to, give wine the footing it was. There was all sorts of things done. Like, first of all, wine making and grape growing is internationally recognized trade. It has its own word called viticulture, right? I think it's viticulture. And if you grow grapes for wine, you're a viticulturist, right? Cannabis does not have anything like that, and it never has. So what can we do to make something like that happen? Well, I think that states or countries, if possible, need to do something to officially recognize cannabis as, being significant, especially California. And I think there's a good opportunity for that to happen. Humboldt County has been doing it a long time, the Emerald Triangle. Areas like Napa and Sonoma have been officially recognized by the state in different ways, which has given it this official recognition and designation. And when you look at those sorts of recognitions and an international market, you need things like that to have protections, like geographical indicators and appellations that are recognized globally through the United Nations treaty, I believe. There's a couple different of them that govern this sort of stuff. So, if we're talking about normalization, and yes, conversation is great, and we need to keep doing that, and we need to keep showing up places, and we need to keep speaking and engaging with the public, but we also, if there's ways we can do it officially, what I know it's hard to influence policy. We've been doing it forever. That's has been his mission for so long, and he's great at it. But there's things that we could do that aren't policy really related, but officially recognizing cannabis as a crop of historical significance. Something like that can be done. And it would help a lot with normalization and possibly creating some sort of official craft standard, and or can we get like a title like a viticulturist, Can we be recognized like that? I understand there's like the Ganjier program going on, but that's different, so there's a lot of stuff that can be done to move that normalization needle forward. And this whole conversation is all an aspect of that, and just really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, you're
So
you're so right. And I feel like if we could do things like if farms could have tasting rooms, just like, vineyards do. That sort of normalization, like creating, it's not so much about buying things as it is about creating those experiences so that people have something to talk about and go back and become aficionados. And then, think about if today, somebody decided that they were going to, crack down on the wine industry. Like, what would voters do around that? They go wild. I mean, we have, how many people do you know who are passionate about their wines? Cultivating that in our cannabis consumers, I think is a big part of the conversation as well. And, going into the consumer experience, there's a huge disconnect between the consumer experience and the farmer reality. What do you think what do you wish more people understood about the work and the people behind the jars that people are purchasing? And I know there's a lot behind that.
I mean, I think honestly, it comes down to the effect of, how much you enjoy the experience that you get from consuming the cannabis, whether it's a vape or a dab or a joint or whatever, edible. I mean, I know from 30 years of smoking in Humboldt and much longer, not, well, since I was like 12, I would, and some weed just doesn't like make you feel as great, and it's not consistent amongst everybody, but I know for a fact that there's something about good outdoor. I mean, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe, but I think it's completely real. And I also have traveled around the world too, and tried some cannabis that was like very incredibly different. In Morocco, for example, the hashish that they were making, they've been making for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We don't even really know. Um, was a completely different experience. And it's hard for me to describe exactly, but just like, I think, and I don't like trash talking the super chemical or the super indoor, but I've had definitely like freak out moments where cannabis is great. It's a teacher for sure. And I may have just, the worst of it may have been that I went and like cleaned up my room or did some, but I like cannabis to not make me extremely paranoid and not make me like nervous. And I like to have it be really enjoyable. And so I know that when I'm smoking certain kinds, that's what's going to happen. And I think people need to really analyze, how they feel from the different types of cannabis that are available out there. And I know personally, the good sun grown, good vibes went into it, good vibes come out of it. And that may sound really metaphysical, but I believe wholeheartedly in it.
Oh, I do too. I mean, for me, I've gotten
It's
to the point where it's like I like something that, at the end of the day, like the day just falls off my shoulders.
And just
I'm all about
yeah.
that.
yeah,
I remember one of our first in, one of our first inspections. I think we had like got our permit in April of 2019. I mean, we had a temporary permit. We were like officially permitted, and then got our state license. It's like a month or 2 months later it was processed, and I swear it was like a week or 10 days, and we had inspection on the farm with the DCC, and they're like out there in their shirts and they're matching, and they've been around, not too many farms because it was closer to the beginning of legalization, but wow, like these are the biggest plants we've ever, like these are what did you do? I'm like, this is grown with love. This is the vibe, like it's real. Also grown weed with my brother and my husband at times that were stressful, and we had a little baby, and like we were broke, and it was a challenge, it was a struggle, and it's like the crop struggled. It felt the pain. It was like, man, this is hard for all of us. There's no water here. Everyone's like underfed and overworked, and the plants really reflect that. And I don't know that like I want the consumer to know, just to get back to your question, like that it's a lot of work to grow this plant, but like the way in which we are practicing our craft is a lot of work, and people come to the farm and they see what it takes to produce these flowers in this way. And there's definitely, like a lot of maybe ease and convenience from having, all of your plants on a bench in a pot and 3 gallons on a timer, and everything's done from your phone, and you control everything from your phone. Like that sounds liberating, but it feels disconnecting, and it's like something I think that is inherent to the quality of sun-grown craft cannabis produced out of Humboldt and the Emerald Triangle is the work. It's the love, it's a labor of love, like if you're working something that you love your job, you never work a day in your life. And I do love my job. I do feel like I do a lot of work, so I don't know that I fully embody that, but like it's an incredible task to pull off a sun-grown crop, right? Or even anything, like when you're growing outside, like there's the effort that's put into it, but there's also just the incredible influences that are gained by the plant by being cultivated outside. Like the experience of the moon gradually rising so many times throughout its life cycle. It's like we used to plant much earlier. Now there's kind of like the economy of how long we want to be growing, how much water we have to give, right? We plant a little bit later, so the plants don't see as many moon cycles as they used to. But the influences of the birds swooping and chattering, like the influences of the people communicating with the plants, like we're going to get transplanted today, you're going to go into your forever home, like we're talking to these girls like every step along the way. And I think that um, you know that's part of what people can feel out of the experience, and also understand like that there's so much heart and soul put into it, and the influences from nature, are really accumulated in these plants, in their own experiences. And I definitely, I fully believe in the co-evolution of plants and cannabis. And I definitely feel like cannabis is using people in such a way to evolve. Like cannabis is using that to evolve it, right? It's like, this man is my ally. The things that he understands me, he understands in ways that, we can do new work together. And I think that's one of the most impressive parts of this plant, is that co-evolution and that relationship that it has with people, and people also have with the plants, as they understand what cultivars they like to smoke, what effects they like. um, I really appreciate when we're looking at different cultivars to bring into the field. Like a lot of the nurseries are now offering like growth habits and potential yields and flower structure, which is really helpful as a farmer, but also
Oh, I think
Awesome.
we lost Hannah for a second. Wait, Hannah, what you're saying, I totally get that. And actually, one of the earlier episodes for Craft Farmer Month, we were at Emerald Spirit Botanicals and having conversations with Katie Jean about how she speaks to her plants and she knows when it's time to harvest and what they need, and that there's this, for somebody who's so in tune with their plants, there's this language and this connection where you just know things. And it's, it might sound kind of strange for people who are very logic minded about it, but there is this amazing organic connection that farmers have with their plants.
We keep making it sound easier to have like a super controlled environment that you might have in a big factory farm or, warehouse indoor kind of scenario. But you know what else loves super controlled environments? Bugs, viruses, all kinds of like nasty little things that, we've all tried that. And a lot of us have been like, we'll take the challenges that come along with sunshine and the occasional rain when you don't want it, whatever, because we see that, for one, you don't have to spray the crap out of your plants all the time with all kinds of nasties. I mean, you can't really spray cannabis with too nasty stuff and pass any tests, but people do, and they sneak around, and I know that that's not happening out here, and especially not in any of these circles. And then, just in general, like even, the stuff that is allowed to be sprayed on cannabis, it's not really what we're after. We're not like wanting to, mix our cannabis with a bunch of even organic type pesticides or whatever. So,
right.
Yeah, I guess that's just one thing to be said for, as much as like a controlled environment sounds nice, and maybe people that aren't big into farming might not realize that, like, there's a ton of things that come along with that make life actually sometimes as hard or harder,
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's it.
And growing in the sun is not broken. It's never was, and it always, I think we started doing indoor because we were hiding it, and somehow people were like, that's the good stuff. And now we don't have to hide it. Let's put outdoor on the pedestal that it deserves to be.
Yeah, because there's nothing like the sun. Sean, you were gonna say something. Did you want to?
Oh, got it. Must have slipped my brain. I'm sorry.
No worries. When you get a bunch of people geeking out, it's like these things. Indy, you were gonna say something too. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, totally. It was to Nat's earlier, like the metaphysical comment, and I'm all about the woo and weed, and I think that there's definitely, obviously, something there. There's an energetic exchange that occurs when a cultivator is interacting with their plants. Everybody that touches that plant, there's an energetic exchange the plant has with the earth. That's why I grow in native soil and under the sun. There's it's not a new thing. This is something that's been happening for 10,000 years. Human beings have been growing cannabis, as far as they can tell, at least. And it's been used, for ritualistic purposes and as this bridge, connecting the spirit and the physical. And it's also contains a spirit just like us. So, I mean, there's so much going on here with the plant. And in this evolutionary relationship human beings have had with this plant for those 10,000 years, which has just recently been cut off, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something that we're all a part of right now, is reestablishing this evolutionary relationship that we have had with the plant that's been taken away from us. And so that's something also, like, I would love, when people look at our jars on the shelf, understanding that we're not just growing weed to get high. We're reestablishing this connection that humans have had with a plant for 10,000 years,
Yeah.
So it's evolution.
It is evolution. And a lot of people don't realize that cannabis is probably the one plant that we've had the oldest symbiotic cultivation relationship with. And they're always shocked at that. And of course, behind every flower and well-tended field, there's also a battle happening at policy level one that determines whether small farmers can even survive. And Ross, HCGA has really been the voice for small farms, for Humboldt and beyond, because I know Judy's and Judy Walter are in Trinity County, and they're part of HCGA so as well. So Judy would be here saying, "Don't forget Trinity." But there are so many, people who you have represented through the years. But what are the biggest policy fights right now, Ross, and what progress are you seeing?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by saying, I work with HCG on a local level, working on our local policy, and I think there's been some really important movement at the local level here in Humboldt County over the last couple of years that we can talk about. And Humboldt County Growers Alliance also works in partnership with trade associations in Trinity County and Mendocino County and on the Central Coast as partners of Origins Council, which is where we do our state level and federal level policy work. So I sort of wear multiple hats, working with Humboldt County Growers Alliance on the local level here, and also contracting with Origins Council for state level policy work as well, which we all do sort of collectively and cooperatively. So I think at the state level, from my perspective, there's kind of two areas that are really important. One is something I think we've been talking about sort of throughout this conversation, which is how do we create a more direct relationship between people who enjoy cannabis and the farmer who grew it? And I think there's a lot of different elements of how that can happen. Sara, you mentioned, for example, tasting rooms. Why don't we have that sort of, wine style opportunity in the cannabis industry? There are also things I think are more, in some ways, unique to cannabis. A lot of cannabis farmers are far down a dirt road, kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? And so for a lot of people, the tasting room approach doesn't work for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that we worked on with HCGA and Origins Council a couple of years ago was legislation to allow farmers to sell their own product to consumer at cannabis events. So not quite a farmer's market. One day that would be great, but trying to take some incremental steps, something more maybe like a beer festival, to be able to start to encourage that direct relationship between farmers and people who enjoy cannabis. Unfortunately, that legislation, AB 1111, was vetoed by the governor about a year and a half ago. We are hearing the DCC may have some interest in taking a second look at that idea. So I think that's something which is really exciting. And then, other opportunities to come closer to consumers. I think, one thing that's really would be an incredible thing to work on is direct to consumer shipping, like we see in the wine industry with wine clubs, where if you find a small micro winery you enjoy, if you're anywhere in the country or most places in the country, you're able to receive shipments of that winery's wine. And that makes it so that you don't have to be producing huge amounts of wine in order to have this kind of like cult following. So I think that drawing closer in that relationship between producer and consumer is important. And I think another thing we've talked about here is really, I broadly call normalization. I think when cannabis was legalized in California, it was really legalized very much coming out of prohibition. And so a lot of what informed our laws, our policies is, I think on one hand, a desire for sort of maximal control. And on the other hand, fees, taxes, which were sort of set almost as if the thought process was, how much can we extract, right? Like how high can we set the fee where it's like, technically people could still pay it. And now we're 10 years in, and if you want to grow, 1/10 of an acre of cannabis outdoors, it's $5,000 a year just for your state licensing fee, not even taking into account the, dozen other agencies that you're paying fees to, not taking into account the taxes, not taking into account the compliance costs. So I think you can simplify a lot of that and say something which is true, which I think may be surprising to some people, which is that cannabis right now is not considered agriculture in the state of California. We're not regulated under the California Department of Food and Agriculture. We don't have access to a lot of the agricultural programs, institutional supports that other farmers do. And the way in which cannabis is regulated is really, in many ways, more focused on control over the plant than really viewing it as a normal agricultural product. So I think between those two things, creating more opportunities for relationships directly between people and farmers, and then normalizing cannabis as agriculture on the other hand, I think that's where a lot of policy really should be going over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I feel like a step towards that is the inclusion in the state fair. Having the only government sanctioned cannabis competition in the world is it's not a huge step, but it is a step in itself, towards that. I mean, I remember when I first started in cannabis, and I think it was between 3,000 and 3,500 a pound, which, it kind of ages me, sorry. But I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is like one of the few times in the history of farming that farmers are actually prospering, because, we see, farmers in other areas of agriculture that are constantly struggling. They're not getting paid what things should be worth. Um, and, it as we got into the government being more involved, we got more into that, where we're seeing these really sad prices per pound, or like just knowing like how much a farmer gets per eighth, like nowadays blows my mind of how little it is. And then when we get into taxation, like people were really getting upset about the excise tax being taken back to 15%, and other people were looking at it as a win. And I was like, this is shit all the way around. Like it's like, great. So you've taken it back to another high rate, but all these nonprofits that were promised this tax money, they're like, oh, the cannabis industry is going back on their promises. And the podcast got tagged in a few of those things on Instagram. And I was like, I just wanted to pull them aside and like give them a hug and be like, listen, if you tax us out of existence, you get nothing. Like, let's really break this down. Like, you're having these very emotional reactions that are also fueled by stigma, because I feel like a lot of the promises, a lot of the things that were agreed upon in legalization were also to get people on board who were actively against us existing. So now, how do we get in there and do something that can serve everybody, but also reminding policymakers around the world that we are not a panacea. We are not the cure to their bad business decisions and their lack of knowledge of Econ 101. And if they're going to do that to us, they need to do it to every industry, and they wouldn't dare with the amount of lobbying power that other industries have. This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition, and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And one thing I add is I think one of the fundamental problems we have in California is that our regulatory framework was created by a ballot proposition.
Yeah.
And the ballot proposition, didn't just say, do you want to legalize cannabis, yes or no? It was about 60 pages of really detailed policy. So, there are things that even the California legislature can't do because of the fact that we have a regulatory framework that comes from a ballot proposition. And I think what that means is that ultimately, eventually, we are going to need probably a new ballot proposition in California. Particularly as we both look ahead to the potential for federal legalization, we also look at how much is changing, how much we're learning within the framework that we have. And I think what that means is that ultimately it really comes down to voters. It comes down to people about what type of regulatory framework, we want to see. Like, I think, a lot of these conversations are political conversations. They happen with lobbyists, they happen, behind closed doors in Sacramento. But ultimately, I think to really fundamentally address a lot of the problems we have, it's something that probably will have to go back to the voters. And I think everyone's going to play a part in that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And as we get to the federal level, we see more taxation baked into it. I just did an interview with Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and she was talking about how they want to do a 5% tax that will go to equity programs. And so one of the things that I asked her, I said, before you put together your taxation structure, I would ask you to review the taxation in states so that you can understand the burden and seeing how balanced and imbalanced things are, actually more imbalanced. But as legalization expands globally, What lessons from Humboldt's history do we risk losing if we don't protect small-scale farming? Oh no, I just threw that out there.
I would say like particularly in Humboldt, the history of like the homesteading and the back to the land movement that is associated with the cannabis culture that helped um, really create it in California to some degree in the counterculture in the 60s. I think that is directly related to the legalization movement currently still. Um, yeah, and as we were just saying, like as the needle kind of bounces back and forth through the policy changes, seeing how that happens and being aware of that, I think is also of importance to know as you go forward when when we're regulating things after post prohibition to not overregulate because how that has affected our current market and essentially created this extinction level event within craft cannabis currently in the California market.
Yeah. When we are looking at federal legalization, what do you think as far as guardrails that are needed to make sure that these small farms don't get left behind? Because, I talked to the congresswoman about being aware of the taxation in other states, but there's so much more to it than that.
Totally. Uplifting programs such as the Appalachian models, uplifting other agricultural like cooperatives and those kind of entities that could be enhanced within cannabis, I think would be those kind of guardrails, along with really allowing us those direct to consumer models that remove the kind of overcomplicated licensing system.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, cannabis is a new industry, but it's already a microcosm for the problems in the United States with farming and ag, and it's already a microcosm. We do have the opportunity to sort of develop this industry in a way that does look to protect small business and real not factory farm kind of industry. And do we want it to be part of the solution or part of the problem
Yeah,
as we build it out?
absolutely. Ross, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one project we've been working on at the federal level. So I mentioned HCGA. We're partnered with other local trade associations in California with Origins Council, and then Origins Council in turn is partnered with other associations representing small craft cannabis producers in other states as part of the National Craft Cannabis Coalition. So we sort of have these coalitions operating at different levels. And this past year, the National Craft Cannabis Coalition, we worked with our congressional representative here on the North Coast, Jared Huffman, to introduce the SHIP Act in Congress, which is legislation that is really designed to sort of anticipate federal cannabis legalization and start a conversation about federal cannabis legalization. And it's a really short bill. It's just, I think, 3 or 4 pages. And basically all it says is that when cannabis is descheduled, legalized federally, small cannabis producers should have the opportunity to ship their own products directly to consumers, just like wineries do right now. And in some ways, it might seem like a weird time to introduce a bill like that because it doesn't look like cannabis is going to be legalized tomorrow. But that was really coming from a specific place. And the place it was coming from is seeing some of these early conversations about federal legalization in Congress, really, not understanding how much cannabis, not just in California, but around the country, is produced by small and craft farmers. And to go back to really the theme, I think, of our conversation, that the cannabis is a craft product and not a commodity. And so how do you build regulations that really acknowledge that? And so we really wanted to put that bill forward in order to start a conversation about direct-to-consumer shipping of these craft products is really important for a federal framework that will support small producers. And one reason I want to say this is I think it's an important opportunity for anybody listening to really take action. We're actively looking for congressional co-sponsors. For the measure, Representative Valerie Hoyle from Oregon is also co-sponsored the measure. And the more congressional co-sponsors the measure gets, the more momentum builds in Congress and sort of the better position something like that is to be a part of the federal legalization conversation going forward. So really, no matter where you are, where you're listening to this, I think can make a big difference to contact your congressperson and encourage them to support and co-sponsor that legislation. Because I think we're in a period where even though we're not going to legalize tomorrow, really building that support for those types of policies is really important and timely.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, pun intended, plant the seeds before things get going, because as the ball starts rolling, more and more people are going to want to get involved, and not all of them have the best of intentions. And it is an excellent time for people to reach out to their elected officials for this, especially because I think, I say this almost in every episode, but now more than ever, our elected officials need to understand how interested their constituents are in cannabis policy and how it affects them. Because, some people may argue with me that they don't have an outdated view of their constituents, but they do, in the fact that they don't realize that their jobs depend on how active they are on this. And they won't know unless we tell them. I wanna just kind of switch a little bit here. Humble farmers often describe their work as environmental activism as much as agriculture. How do you see regenerative cannabis contributing to the larger sustainability model? And I know we talked about this a little bit in the beginning of the episode, but we didn't really dig into it as much. What are your thoughts around that?
I'd love to talk about that. Kind of growing up in Humboldt, it was actually kind of one of my realizations as a young man was like how much experimentation was happening in the cannabis culture within the field of regenerative agriculture, and like the watershed of different knowledge bases that was happening through that experimentation, from the Jadam stuff that Stephen does to just making your own compost. And I was inspired personally to get into the cannabis industry because of that like broad knowledge base of experimentation within the regenerative cannabis culture. So yeah, I think that's sorry if I'm kind of going on a tangent.
No.
But that was I think that's something we want to bring to the larger, cannabis industry, quote unquote, is this knowledge base that we've like through because of the market that used to be here, we had more potential to experiment, but we still have that knowledge base in us, and we want to be able to like move that forward and evolve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, cannabis has the opportunity to be the tip of the spear, right? Because we are still growing comparatively to what other agricultural crops are going for, relatively a high value product. And historically, in both traditional ag and in, traditional cannabis cultivation, it's been very input heavy, right? And now the force of the industry, even if you look at these manufactured products that are being marketed to indoor growers and things like that, they have a system, and in the end, it's all salt-based fertilizer, and it's just formulated or repackaged in a way with specific directions so that a cultivator won't kill his plants or their plants, right? And so, the value is encapsulated in this so-called crop science. And, I found in my research and my studies, it's just, scientists are looking for something, to find wrong, right? You can go do a soil test and you can find you're deficient in something, but are you really needing that? You can go and buy like some sort of chemical or silica and pay a lot of money. I talked to a cultivator like, wow, I just cannot believe how much I have to spend on this silica product, and I'm like, straw is like 14% silica by mass. If you just mulch with straw, that takes care of your silica problem. It costs you $8 for a massive bale of straw. So it just to me, I think this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity I'm looking to explore with HCGA and offering value to our members, is making some of these very simple techniques and some of the science in regenerative farming and regenerative methods, broadly available, and people can pick and choose what makes sense for their climate, what makes sense for their terroir, their area, and experiment on their own, because it's going to be very different for just even depending on their soil types, your soil microbes, things like that. So different things will work for different folks. But I think there are some really really useful concepts that we can help farmers implement. And because this is such a quote unquote hot commodity, I think this is an opportunity to bleed into larger scale agriculture, because there's a massive difference in what using salt-based fertilizer in industrial ag scale is just destroying our soils versus switching to basically free inoculants and fertilizers you can make yourself. It is an incredible difference what we can do, not only for the cost and viability of agriculture in our country, as well as just the health of our soils, carbon sequestration, everything. There's just so much change. A little bit of adopting different practices can make a massive change.
Yeah, absolutely.
You guys, I have to get on and meet another meeting. It's coming right up, or it's already at pass. But I appreciate you. And just to answer that question, like the Humboldt County outdoor cannabis is environment. Yeah, the idea that it ever, I mean, maybe there were a couple bad actors and it maybe caused there to be some backlash, but that is by far a thing of the past. And if you care about the environment, support these kinds of craft growers 100%, because and I come from an environmental background. I did environmental policy, and it's just ridiculous to think that giant indoor cannabis factories are somehow have less of a footprint than these small really regenerative type farms that are happening in this area and in areas like this around the country. And I think people need to get that out of their head, that this somehow can be bad for the environment. It's absolutely the opposite. It keeps people engaged in their communities, taking care of the environment. I've seen, so much positive happen because of cannabis for our ecology here locally.
Yeah.
And I got to jump on this. Thank you guys.
Thanks for joining us, Nat. Always a pleasure, man.
Keep on keeping on.
So as corporate consolidation accelerates, what does real equity look like, not just for ownership, but for regional identity and community survival? And I know that's, it's one of those questions where it's like, I hate thinking about the corporate aspect of it. I mean, if they would use their powers for good, and I'm sure, somewhere there are people in these corporations that are trying to, but the corporate acceleration is impactful on the work that we've been doing for years. So what are your thoughts?
I would like to see, in the form of equity, a lot of what I see weighing people down is compliance and just the challenges of dealing with the monolith that are these different like government agencies. And it's frustrated me, when I've consulted for other farms and helping them get their licensure, that these large cannabis corporations have their own liaison at the state, right? If they're changing something with their cultivation practice and they have to move a greenhouse, they can call someone and make it happen. Whereas someone who's managing 5,000 square feet and trying to just keep their farm and keep their land has to hire somebody and then work with them to modify their diagram and submit it. And it takes, I've seen science amendments take over 12 months at the state. And technically you as a farmer are not supposed to be making the modifications to your practices while you're doing that. I know regenerative farmers in Humboldt County that would like to do crop rotation. So instead of maxing out the amount of canopy they could have on their property, they've deliberately grown only half of it with the intention to rotate their fields with different crops as part of their practice. And it's just not functionally doable at the state because the state takes 3 to 6 months to process an amendment. And when you say equity, applying for these different equity programs is almost sometimes just an obstacle in of itself, and the bureaucracy that goes into it. I would love to see if they bring back some of these components to create a way to streamline, have someone, have these equity farms be able to reach out and have a liaison at the state to grease the wheel, so to speak. And when it comes to that, these small farms have been a victim of the wheels of justice and what government has done to them. Why don't you give back in the way of making it easier for them to just do their business?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think one of the biggest things that they forget is that small farms and small businesses, the money and the jobs stay in their communities, and having strong communities is where it's at, because we're only as strong as our most vulnerable members of society. And if you've got a whole town that's suffering because their small businesses can't thrive, that's a huge, huge problem. Looking ahead, what gives you hope for the next generation of Humboldt growers? And on the flip side, what keeps you up at night?
I can think of one thing that does both: federal legalization.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity, but it's also, the potential for even more corporate consolidation is also in that pathway. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, it could go either way. It's we've got a lot to sort out. Even when we get into federal legalization, it puts more work on the table for us, for sure.
I can say just the light at the end of the tunnel. Some of the things that we're doing within HCGA, like the 12 J's program, building more of our own supply chain,
Yeah.
getting our own, marketability and sales platforms kind of lined out. I think that's the really, what gives us hope, at least gives me hope in the short term.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, for listeners that are in California, the 12 Days of Christmas box is awesome. And a portion of the proceeds, I believe, go to support HCGA. And you get to try lots of small craft farmers, beautiful joints, and you should check them out. There'll be different drops throughout the state, and they'll also be available in dispensaries as well. And I got my box last year, and it was such a delight. I was so excited. I'm actually going to be doing the drop in December in Oakland in the East Bay. So I'll be helping out with that. So people out there, pick it up. If you don't partake, it makes an excellent gift. If you can do the whole box, or for your adult, gift recipients, it's a great stocking stuffer too. You can even divide it up and give it to people, but check it out. It's wonderful. And as we wrap up, I want to end where we began, with the relationship between farmers and consumers and how we can help bridge that gap.
Well, I think that what you just brought up, the 12 J's, is one right there. More opportunities where we can connect directly farmers to the consumer, to the citizens of California. I think that is one of the best ways that we can bridge that gap. And I do want to say, emeraldtrianglecraft.com. That's where you can look up the 12 J's box, right, Sean? Did I get that right?
Yes,
okay,
right on it.
All right, awesome.
I just even like, oh, sorry.
Nope, go ahead.
Just expanding on that, I think we're, also trying to open up more, tourism accessibility to meet the farmers up here in the cannabis industry. So you can actually not just meet the farmers and see their products, but see where they live and how they, are integrated with the culture. I think that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people who want to visit, there's so many things to do. If you like farms, visiting the farms, being able to go to dispensaries to have access to some of the smaller craft cannabis farms that you may not find in the cities, because there are a lot of great dispensaries up in the Emerald Triangle that you can purchase them from. Also, you can have wine and cannabis. My God, they can actually live together. Hot springs, different things like that. I mean, you go further up, there's actually a cafe where you can get coffee and have a hot tub. I mean, just the amazing things that you can do with tourism up in your area. It's so gorgeous. So why not? Why not go up and check it out? And it's one of those things that even if you like cannabis and your travel partner it doesn't dig it as much, it's not their jam, they won't feel left out. There's a lot to do.
Yeah, I do want to just mention, yes, Humboldt is a full spectrum experience. There is so much to do here. It's an amazing place. We have so much more than just cannabis. And that's, that's something that really makes us an asset. Yeah, come and enjoy it. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, going there and just inhaling that beautiful air and getting to see the sights, it's just something to behold. So before we close out, will everybody say how you can be reached, and also for the farmers, what your farm is and where they can find your flowers? You want to start?
I could go.
Yeah, thanks, Indy.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm Indy Riggs. My farm is Galactic Farms. You could find my website, www.galactic-farms.com. I'm also on Instagram. I think it's galactic_farms. You could find my cannabis anywhere you can purchase Poet products, and here soon at the Woods in West Hollywood. Also, Soulful. You could find Galactic Farms cannabis. So they have a dispensary in Healdsburg, Sebastopol, and San Francisco.
Sean?
Currently, I'm not have anything branded at retail level yet. Salmon Creek Legacy is the co-op of which I am a co-founder of, and we are relaunching our flower and our dab line and soon here. I'm on Instagram at Cherry Valley Farms, and yeah, our website is cherriesbest.com, and please reach out.
Awesome. Steve?
Not quite cultivated commercially yet, but yeah, just my backyard personals. But yeah, I'm looking to launch maybe 2,000 square feet next year. But you can connect with me on Instagram at slconsultinginc.com.
Thank you for all your work. And Ross?
Yeah, we just really encourage folks to follow HCGA and Origins Council on Instagram. A lot of great information there about both the policy that we're working on, as well as opportunities like 12J's, to more directly connect with farmers. And then I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, and people should feel free to connect there and reach out.
Awesome. And check out Humboldt Seed Company. And also Hannah's farm is Emerald Queen Farms. Check them out. Beautiful farm. Lots of beautiful pictures. Support your local farmer. Know where you get your flowers. Ask questions. Stay active. And thanks for joining us today. Thanks, everybody. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you all next year.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend. Let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sarah Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sarah on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsarah.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher. Tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.